for about $1.2 million worth of funds in repayment. And Robert Hansen is a really interesting character insofar that it really sums up quite succinctly the problem we face, which is, and I always get into trouble for saying this, 1.2 million over a 22-year period for betraying your country and your organization isn't a lot of cash. I think I would do it for maybe 100 million, 200. We all have our price, right? But 1.2 million for that isn't it. The issue with Robert was that he was passed over for promotion. He's a really smart guy, and he knew it. And in the FBI, he had some great ideas about bringing these newfangled things in called computers. He thought it would really help the way they would work. He was ignored. His bosses ignored him, he wasn't promoted, and he got angrier and angrier. And when he was intercepted by Soviet intelligence, as it was in the 80s, he was groomed by them. They told him, you're really smart. You know what would be great is if you showed them how smart you were by stealing information from underneath their noses. And that's what he did. He got involved in the very exciting world of cold drops in the middle of a park in the middle of Washington, D.C. in winter. Envelopes stacked full of information, and he'd retrieve or get in return gold and jewelry and stacks of cash in return. So he's caught up in this really exciting world. And this is part of the problem. There's a psychological piece to this. And any good insider threat program must take this into account, to take into account people like Quentin here. Quentin's leaving his job. And with him, he's going to take some customer data. He's going to take some IP, maybe some technical data, some commercial documents, because Quentin feels as if he owns this. He's been working on it for a couple of years. It's his information, right? You've just supplied him with a computer and a desk to sit at for the past couple of years. So he's going to take it with him. But he doesn't realize that this is the core of your product, or these are users that you need to protect, especially with regards to new GDPR capabilities as well. Or you've got Dave. Dave is, as you can see, pretty disgruntled. He started at your organization fresh out of university, bright and ambitious, and a bit like Robert Hansen, he's gotten a little disillusioned over the years. Maybe, again, passed over for promotion. Maybe people aren't quite listening to his ideas. Maybe he's found a hole in your product that he wants to tell the world about, which is an ethical gray area, but you probably want to know about it. Then we've got Sandra the spy, who, again, like Robert Hansen, had external factors putting pressure on her, financial pressures. Maybe she's got a couple of houses, a couple of mortgages. Maybe she's got personal matters that led to people to be able to provide leverage against her. And this is where we start to see the world of management anticipating issues with the workforce, combining and clashing with security. Have you got an integrated function there? Are you able to spot these things? And then we have Careless Caroline, who doesn't know about the security policy. She's not trained in it. Or she just wants to get her job done. It's Friday. She needs to send a file, but her email limit's 20 megabytes, and this thing's a couple of gigabytes. She's got to get over to a client. How does she do that securely? Encrypted, traced, so you can audit, make sure that it doesn't have any sensitive information in it, and you know where it's gone. These are some of the significant challenges we face. In order to highlight this, I'm going to go through a fairly quick case study. This is with a trial that we did a couple of years ago with a client at the time where they wanted us to come in and understand how well they were doing. They had all these controls deployed across the organization. They were an automotive brand, so they had their R&D division, they had their manufacturing division, and they did some consultancy on the side as well. And they had a number of departments, but primarily they wanted us to go in and check out the engineers, because engineers is like herding cats. They're really difficult. I'm an engineer, so I can say this, but we're really difficult. We like turning things off and getting around things and generally not doing what we're told to do. What we did was we went in, we deployed on 50 engineers endpoints, and immediately we started to see some interesting non-standard behavior. So they had come to us saying that we've got a number of controls. No one can install anything on their endpoint without us knowing about it. It's great. And we've got all of our permissions set up. No one can access data that they shouldn't be allowed to, so that's great. And we've got a USB blocking policy. That's brilliant too. And HR totally is integrated into security. So you're probably figuring out now that the 4 things we found are related to those. So the first thing we found was this engineer had installed a bit of backup software, something called Duplicati. He'd set it up to do an incremental backup across the network, slowly pull in files from around the place. Now, the interesting thing about it was that the files he was pulling in were from different file shares that he really shouldn't have had access to. So for example, we're seeing engineering designs, fine, he's an engineer, he should have access to that kind of thing. Then he was getting wind tunnel tests, okay. But then we're seeing things like bills of material for new designs, PCB board designs, code, commercial contracts, things, frankly, he shouldn't have had access to. Gets to Friday, and we thought we'd monitor it for a bit longer, let the organization know. They wanted us to keep monitoring, make sure that they were onto something live as such. And it came to Friday afternoon, this individual unplugged his machine from the network. For whatever reason, he thought he was being monitored through a network intrusion detection system. He plugged in removable media. Again, they thought they had a policy to stop, at least a control to stop that. And he dumped the 182,000 files worth about £10 million onto his USB drive. Now, the debrief was very interesting. We called up the CISO, and we spoke to her, and we said, did you understand that this was going on? Do you know why this might be going on? She says, nope, give me 10 minutes. She came back. Turned out this guy was leaving the organization. He's going to another job. He's taking all these materials with him. They'd also discovered that the domain admin password was common knowledge across the entire engineering team. So no matter how many controls you had in place, you still had people able to circumvent them. So your control is only as good as your independent audit that you set up in order to counterbalance it. Very, very important. But really, the point here is that there were rules in place. We all feel comfortable around rules, and if rules are in place, people may break them, we'll detect them, it'll be great. But if we have a think about some of the behaviors that people engage in, we can potentially detect it at the technical stage. So if we're circumventing auditing and logging functions, it's pretty suspicious behavior, or if we're turning off certain controls or devices, yeah, that's a problem. But then you've got the non-technical angle as well. And again, this starts to fit into the how have you set up your assigned a threat program? Do you have one-to-ones with your team, or do they dig into areas such as, how you doing? Are you happy with your job? Do you feel listened to within your organization? So there's a whole realm of other activities and behaviors that simply we can't write rules for. I mean, if we look at how data is stolen from an organization, some of these things we can block. So file transfer, firewalls, you can block certain services, but shadow IT is incredibly difficult to stop. It's that little air gap leak that a lot of organizations have. Email, removable media. The interesting thing about this is all the training you may have given to your users, they will use at this point because they will back up the data they're trying to steal. So well done, good work, you've done great there. So they'll typically use email and or network and removable media access, for example, to take stuff with them. So you're looking at a couple of vectors for data leaving your organization. If you can disrupt it soon enough, you can look at various behaviors, make sure you can anticipate it. We blatantly stole this from Lockheed Martin. They've got their kill chain, which is all about people breaking in. But we've modeled one that allows you to understand how insiders may take stuff from you. And some of these behaviors build up from innocuous, non-malicious behaviors all the way through to, yeah, you're trying to steal something now. So you got your recruitment tipping point. With our engineer, it was, I'm leaving the company. I've got a better job, I want to go to another team. Search and reconnaissance, that's maybe going to various folders or locations you shouldn't have access to. In this particular example, if they'd had something in place auditing this, they would have found out that this guy was going into folders with source code and PCB and wind tunnel tests and so on and so forth. Exploitation, which in this context is never something really sophisticated. It's not a 0 day. It's usually the fact that they've already got access to your systems as part of their day-to-day job. They're going to use something like common knowledge of a domain admin password or some other system they have access to because they need access to it to steal information. And this is where it starts to get really tricky because clearly there's the whole balance between security and productivity. You can lock that down. Acquisition. So in our case study, the individual set up a bit of backup software, collated all these files into his single zip file, so his staging area, before finally he exfiltrated it. Again, it's nothing sophisticated like using DNS to leak information, which is a really awesome way of doing it, but he just used USB because he knew he could turn it off. If USB had been blocked, I'm sure there's 100 other ways he could think of to get data out of the organization. And this really kind of comes to the crux of the argument here, which is you can anticipate this, you can try and get in here, but people typically have access to the data they steal as part of their job. some real edge cases in there. Your software engineers, they need to gain access to your source code. Your salespeople, they need to gain access to Salesforce. There's no way around it. And so building in rules simply isn't going to work a lot of the time because you're going to get a lot of false positives. And this is potentially where machine learning steps in, because if you collect the right type of information and subject it to the right type of machine learning capabilities, you can build a baseline and you can start to understand where anomalies start to creep in. In the CERT, the CERT inside a threat blog, which is a fantastic resource for anyone wanting to look into setting up their own insider threat program within their organization. One of their key recommendations is rather obviously create a baseline of what's normal within the organization. And typically the best way of doing that is put lots of people in front of lots of screens, but not a lot of us have that capability. So it falls to having the right tools and the right capabilities in-house to carve through lots of data and show you the right information at the right time. Machine learning is coming of age. Compute power is cheap. A lot of these capabilities have been around for 30, 40 years. But we've not been able to harness them until we've had the intersection of lots of CPU power and lots of big data to throw at these particular capabilities. So building the baseline, what do you want to baseline? This is where you need to take a targeted engineering approach. A lot of people we speak to have these large data lakes because they've been told to collect everything because it might come in of use one day. But if you're collecting, I don't know, router logs on SNMP activity and you're not using that protocol, then why on earth are you doing that within your organization? So what's the high risk areas, what the high risk activities you absolutely need to record data around, and do a bit of a triage and risk analysis around that. And applying the right approach, you want to also compare peer groups as well. So one of the weaknesses of anomaly detection systems across network data is that no two networks are the same. But with people, with humans, you can compare peers against each other. Engineers will typically act like engineers. Salespeople will act like crazy psychopaths. But that woke you up. I love salespeople, they're great. You'll form a grouping of different characteristics, and you can compare them within the group, and you can start to see where Bob in engineering is starting to act more like Alice in sales, for example. And then you can get a really good insight into the really outlier guy here who's probably part of the C-suite or on the board, because we don't follow rules either, which is also part of the problem too. But if you have the right data, if you're collecting the right data and subjecting it to the right analytical capabilities and techniques, you start to build up a rich baseline and picture of what's going on within your organization. So what does it look like? So this is from our dashboard. So the yellow dots here are medium worry. So we sometimes see these activities that have not been marked or tagged as suspicious. But I see that at 8 p.m. we've got a big red dot there. It means lots of activities have been undertaken. And the edge case here is simply an engineer who's been using a bit of backup software to put some files onto a removable device. And we've not seen this before. This is not part of our usual baseline. And when you combine that with additional visual capabilities, this gives your team a bit of a force multiplier. They can see that there's two things here that aren't the same. And from my experience, I need to look into this. And in our experience, the best pattern matches that you have in your organization are your security ops or your admin team, because they know the day-to-day ins and outs or activities of your systems. They typically analyze the logs, look at the SIM engine in order to find out what's going on. So they are the best people to really be exposed to this kind of capability. And then that allows you to start entering into the threat investigation pipeline. So identifying the information, exploration, discovery, so understanding the who, what, where, why, and hows of it, getting to a point where you can do something about it, so your triage capability. So primarily you want to get your business back up and running, right, whilst conducting one of these investigations, and then finally presenting the report. If you have the right tools in order to get the data that you require from your critical systems, this makes things a lot easier. Capabilities and limitations. So with regards to certainly machine learning, helps you carve through large data sets. So you can give your security ops guys a really good insight into that baselining, gives a good set of visualization capabilities. If used properly, it can be a force multiplier, so you can augment your existing team as well. As I say, compute power is cheap and will continue to be so. use it. There are capabilities out there as well. But some of the limitations are really around the kind of data you subject these algorithms to. It's not easy to do, but you can certainly make your life a lot easier if you subject the right data to the right set of algorithms. And whether it be Bayesian or otherwise, you need to have a targeted approach. If you fire all your data into one of these models, you're going to get, it's garbage in, garbage out. It's classic computer science theory. So for example, you wouldn't use this to try and unscrew this. It just wouldn't work. So why would you do that with data as well? So take a targeted approach. So when you're looking at your risk profile within your organization, you've got the top, that's top right, the really hot stuff that's highly likely to happen and will have a high impact. What you want to do is make sure that you're monitoring those systems, you get the right data feeds, and not just doing a blanket collect all from across the organization. So that's where we are right now, but what's next? How do we have human security analytics? Well, I think it's about pulling out the right data from the right sources. It's about ensuring that you've got integration with things like HR. So our friends in the case study, HR wasn't integrated with security. They didn't understand that the pattern of their engineers was to leave at certain times throughout the year. Even access control systems or sentiment analysis from Twitter or LinkedIn, for example. LinkedIn, I'm searching for a new job, is a really good indicator. And also integration of things like user entity behavior analytics, endpoint threat detection, and SIM engines as well. So what the information you need to pluck out there to detect and understand those tasks. And certainly where we're going over the next year is into what we're calling deep learning. So things like prescriptive. So this is what you will need to do if this occurs. I suggest as your friendly AI assistant that you lock this account because this person's up to no good. Or predictive, which is even more kind of interesting, which is a bit more like Minority Report, which is based on these behaviors and these interactions, we can predict that this is going to happen next, and we'll give it a 90% probability that that will be the case. And you should be able to take some sort of proactive measure from it. So thank you very much for your time. Thanks for listening. We're at a stand at the back. If you've got any questions, be delighted to help you out. Thank you.